In this touching story, Daniel, a young man burdened by an unknown past, finds himself working as a gardener at the mansion of Roberto Gonzalez, a wealthy businessman. Unknown to Daniel, the pendant he always wears holds a deep connection to his lost identity. As Daniel works diligently, he faces challenges from Manuel Lopez, the mansion's stern butler, yet remains steadfast in his duties. The story takes a dramatic turn when Roberto notices Daniel's pendant, identical to the one his son wore before disappearing years ago. Determined to uncover the truth, Roberto embarks on an emotional journey, retracing the past and finally revealing that Daniel is indeed his long-lost son. The reunion brings joy, but the road ahead is filled with challenges, especially with Manuel's jealousy threatening Daniel's newfound place in the family. However, Daniel's resilience, supported by his parents, leads him to triumph in both the family business and his personal life. Through trials, betrayals, and heartwarming moments, Daniel emerges as a true leader, bringing the Gonzalez family closer than ever. The mansion, once a symbol of loss, now shines with love and joy as Daniel, Roberto, and Gina look forward to a bright future together. If you are not subscribed, I recommend you subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss any videos. As the millionaire strolled by the garden, his world came crashing down when his eyes locked onto a pendant identical to the one his son had worn before vanishing without a trace all those years ago. Daniel, a young man whose life was defined by hard work and unyielding dedication, lived under the oppressive weight of a past shrouded in mystery. He was raised in the cold, impersonal walls of an orphanage, and at the tender age of 18, he stepped into the world alone, armed with nothing but a heart full of dreams and a moon-shaped pendant, the only link to a past he could barely remember. Daniel found himself employed as a gardener at the grand estate of Roberto Gonzalez, a man of immense wealth and influence. With nothing but his pendant and a desperate hope for a better future, Daniel left behind the only home he had ever known. Life had thrown countless challenges his way, but through sheer determination, he secured a position tending to the vast and breathtaking gardens of Roberto Gonzalez's mansion. His first day on the job was a whirlwind of emotions. Nervous anticipation and a glimmer of excitement surged through him as he took in the beauty of the sprawling estate. Upon his arrival, Daniel was met by Manuel Lopez, the mansion's butler, a man whose cold demeanor was as rigid as the mansion's stone walls. Manuel's eyes, sharp and scrutinizing, bore into Daniel as if trying to unearth every flaw. "I trust you understand the level of commitment required here," Manuel remarked. His tone as icy as his gaze. "The gardens of this mansion are a work of art, and they demand nothing less than perfection." With a resolute nod, Daniel vowed to prove himself. He immersed himself in the task at hand, marveling at the exquisite flowers and meticulously trimmed hedges that adorned the estate. Each day, he poured his heart and soul into his work, nurturing every plant with unwavering care. Despite his relentless efforts, Manuel was never satisfied. His stern critiques were a constant reminder that perfection was not easily attained. From the way Daniel trimmed the hedges to the way he nourished the blooms, nothing escaped Manuel's critical eye. But Daniel, with quiet resilience, soldiered on, undeterred by the relentless disapproval. One crisp morning, while meticulously tending to a bed of roses, Daniel noticed a sleek, luxurious car glide up the mansion's driveway. Roberto Gonzalez had returned from one of his many business ventures. It was the first time Daniel had ever seen the man whose home he meticulously cared for. Roberto's presence was commanding, his stature one of power and prestige, yet his eyes held a softness, a quiet contemplation. Daniel, however, remained focused on his work, unaware of Roberto's curious gaze lingering on him. His mission was clear: to carry out his duties with excellence and, perhaps one day, uncover the secrets of his elusive past. Working at Roberto Gonzalez's mansion was not merely a job for Daniel. It was a pivotal step towards uncovering the truth about his origins. As the day drew to a close, Daniel put away his tools. His body was tired, but his spirit was invigorated by the progress he had made in the garden. This new chapter of his life felt like a fresh start, a fragile hope to build a future while seeking answers to the haunting questions of his past. As he walked away from the mansion, the pendant around his neck glinted in the fading sunlight, a silent omen of the destiny that awaited him. Unbeknownst to Daniel, his encounter with Roberto and the recognition of the pendant would soon unravel a series of events that would change his life forever. In the grand and imposing mansion of Roberto Gonzalez, Daniel quickly settled into his role as the dedicated gardener, finding a certain peace in the rhythm of tending to the sprawling gardens. He embraced the early mornings filled with the scent of dew-covered roses and the satisfaction of seeing the carefully manicured lawns gleam in the sunlight. However, his tranquil existence was marred by a persistent source of tension: Manuel Lopez, the mansion's stern and unyielding butler. Manuel was a man of rigid principles, someone who believed that authority was to be exercised with an iron fist, and from the very first day, he seemed to take an inexplicable dislike to Daniel. Manuel's disdain for Daniel was palpable, manifesting in every interaction between the two. He scrutinized Daniel's work with an unforgiving eye, always ready with a sharp word or a sneer. "These shrubs are an eyesore, Daniel. Do you take pride in this kind of work?" he would often remark, his tone dripping with contempt. Despite Manuel's constant criticisms, which were never accompanied by any constructive advice, Daniel kept his head down and focused on his tasks. He knew that arguing with Manuel would be futile, and instead, he placed his faith in his work, believing that his dedication and effort would eventually be recognized. Yet, as the days turned into weeks, the tension between them only seemed to deepen, like a storm gathering strength in the distance. Then, one afternoon, that storm became a reality. Dark clouds rolled in over the estate, and soon, the sky opened up in a torrential downpour. The wind howled through the garden, tearing leaves from trees and scattering branches across the meticulously maintained grounds. But Daniel, driven by a deep sense of responsibility, refused to seek shelter. Instead, he threw himself into his work with renewed vigor, determined to protect the garden from the worst of the storm's wrath. He worked tirelessly, his clothes soaked through, his hands numb from the cold, as he tried to prevent the chaos from taking over. But even in this moment of crisis, Manuel was there, watching from the shelter of the mansion, his expression as stormy as the weather outside. Seizing the opportunity to assert his dominance, Manuel ventured out into the garden, shielded by a large umbrella. His presence loomed over Daniel like a dark cloud, and without hesitation, he began to berate the young gardener. "This is unacceptable, Daniel. How could you let the garden fall into such disarray? Even in a storm, this kind of negligence is unforgivable," Manuel barked, his voice cutting through the sound of the rain. "Do you not understand that maintaining the beauty of this garden is paramount? Roberto Gonzalez demands perfection, and you have failed miserably." The other staff, who were also struggling against the storm's fury, paused in their work to witness the scene, their faces a mix of sympathy for Daniel and fear of Manuel's wrath. Daniel, exhausted and drenched, tried to explain, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Mr. Lopez, I'm doing everything I can. The storm came without warning, but I'm working to restore order." But Manuel, his eyes narrowed with disdain, refused to listen. He continued to pick apart Daniel's efforts, his words becoming more hurtful with each passing moment. Just as the situation seemed hopeless, the unmistakable sound of a car engine broke through the storm. Roberto Gonzalez had returned, arriving unexpectedly from a business trip. Stepping out of his car, he immediately noticed the commotion in the garden and strode over with purpose. His presence commanded attention, and as he approached, he took in the scene before him. Manuel towering over a beleaguered Daniel, the garden in disarray, and the staff frozen in place, unsure of what to do. "Manuel, what is happening here?" Roberto's voice was calm but carried an authority that demanded an answer. Manuel, caught off guard, quickly tried to justify his actions. "Mr. Gonzalez, I'm merely ensuring that the garden remains in pristine condition, but this gardener, he's not up to the task," Manuel stammered, his usual confidence faltering under Roberto's steady gaze. Roberto's eyes shifted from Manuel to Daniel, and what he saw made his heart heavy. Daniel, soaked and exhausted, was doing his best under impossible circumstances. The sight filled Roberto with a deep sense of disappointment. Not in Daniel, but in Manuel. With a sternness that brooked no argument, Roberto addressed Manuel, his voice firm and resolute. "I will not tolerate such behavior, Manuel. Every member of my staff works hard, especially in difficult conditions like these. Daniel is doing an admirable job, and he deserves respect, not this disgraceful treatment." The other staff members exchanged glances, their respect for Roberto growing with each word. Manuel, visibly shaken, muttered an apology and retreated into the mansion. His authority diminished. Daniel, now standing in the rain that felt more like a gentle drizzle than a punishing storm, looked at Roberto with immense gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez. Your support means a great deal to me." Roberto offered a warm smile, placing a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "Keep up the good work, Daniel. Remember, we all face pressure, but respect is something we must give freely if we hope to receive it in return." From that day forward, Daniel felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges with Manuel were far from over, but knowing that he had Roberto's support gave him the strength to continue his work with even greater dedication. The mansion's garden became his sanctuary, a place where he could pour his heart and soul into his work, knowing that it was appreciated. However, the events of that day left a lasting impression on Roberto as well. He couldn't shake the feeling of familiarity that had struck him when he saw the moon-shaped pendant hanging around Daniel's neck. The next morning, as Daniel was carefully pruning the roses, Roberto approached him, a sense of urgency and curiosity gnawing at him. He watched the young man work with such dedication, and for a moment, he hesitated, unsure of how to voice the thoughts that had been troubling him. Finally, he spoke, his tone gentle but filled with unspoken emotion. "Daniel, may I have a word with you?" Daniel, surprised by the unexpected request, set down his shears and turned to face Roberto, wiping the dirt from his hands as he did so. "Of course, Mr. Gonzalez. How can I help you?" Roberto's eyes were drawn once again to the pendant that hung around Daniel's neck. "That pendant. It's very beautiful and unique. May I ask where you got it?" Daniel glanced down at the pendant, his expression a mix of surprise and sadness. "I've had it for as long as I can remember, sir. The caretakers at the orphanage where I grew up said they found me with it when I was just a baby, abandoned in a park. I've never known where it came from." As Daniel spoke, a powerful wave of emotion crashed over Roberto. Memories he had buried long ago began to resurface, bringing with them a flood of pain and sorrow. He remembered a time when his life had been shattered by tragedy, the loss of his son, who had disappeared without a trace. The pendant Daniel wore was identical to the one Roberto had given his son, a cherished keepsake meant to symbolize his love and protection. Could it be possible? Could the young man standing before him be the child he had lost so many years ago? Roberto's voice trembled slightly as he asked, "You were found in a park?" Daniel nodded, his brow furrowing in confusion at the intensity in Roberto's voice. "Yes, sir. I was left there, alone with nothing but this pendant. It's the only connection I have to my past." Roberto stood silent for a long moment, the weight of the revelation pressing down on him. Could this truly be his son, returned to him after all these years? The thought filled him with both hope and dread, for if it were true, it would mean that Daniel had endured a life of hardship and loneliness, all because Roberto had failed to protect him. Finally, Roberto spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Daniel, there is something very important that I need to investigate. May I see the pendant more closely?" Daniel, now deeply intrigued and sensing the gravity of the situation, removed the pendant and handed it to Roberto. As Roberto examined the pendant, his hands shook with the realization that this was indeed the same pendant he had given his son. The memories came flooding back. Memories of a time when his son was his whole world, and the devastation he felt when his son was taken from him. "Daniel," Roberto said, returning the pendant to him, "I ask for your patience. There are answers that I must find, and when I do, I promise that I will share them with you." Daniel nodded, still unsure of what was happening, but trusting Roberto. He could feel that something significant was about to be revealed, something that could change his life forever. As Roberto walked away, his heart heavy but resolute, he knew that the journey to uncover the truth about Daniel's past had only just begun. He was determined to find the answers, no matter how painful they might be, for he knew that the truth would set them both free. Roberto retreated to his office in the mansion, his mind a whirlwind of emotions stirred by the revelations that had just surfaced. The familiar comfort of his leather chair offered little solace as he sat down, his body sinking into the worn cushions. He closed his eyes, allowing the memories he had long suppressed to flood back with a painful intensity that left him breathless. It was as if he was once again living that dreadful day, the details as vivid as if they had happened only yesterday. It had been a bright and sunny afternoon many years ago, a day that had begun with the simple joy of spending time with his beloved son, Daniel, then just a lively 3-year-old. They had spent hours at the park, Daniel's laughter ringing through the air as he played, his tiny hands clutching the moon-shaped pendant that Roberto had given him, a symbol of the unbreakable bond between father and son. That pendant was more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a token of Roberto's eternal love and protection, something that had been meant to stay with Daniel forever. As they drove home through the quiet, tree-lined streets, Roberto had felt a sudden and inexplicable sense of foreboding, a cold shiver of danger that he couldn't quite shake off. He glanced in the rearview mirror, catching sight of Daniel in the back seat, smiling and oblivious to the world around him. But before Roberto could process the feeling, it became a terrifying reality. Out of nowhere, a vehicle swerved into their path, blocking the road. 3 men, their faces obscured by dark hoods, emerged with terrifying speed, surrounding the car with weapons drawn. Panic surged through Roberto like a wave, but he forced himself to remain calm for Daniel's sake. He tried to reason with the men, his voice trembling with fear. "Please, take whatever you want, but leave my son alone," he pleaded, his heart pounding in his chest. But the thieves were cold and merciless, their intentions far darker than mere robbery. They dragged Roberto out of the car, their fists and boots beating him into submission with brutal efficiency. The pain was overwhelming, a blinding agony that robbed him of his strength. As he lay on the cold pavement, bloodied and broken, he could only listen helplessly as the engine of his car roared to life, the sound echoing in his ears as his son was driven away. Roberto awoke hours later in a sterile hospital room, the bright lights and antiseptic smell a harsh contrast to the nightmare he had just lived through. His body throbbed with pain, every breath a struggle, but none of that mattered as the realization hit him like a freight train. Daniel was gone. Despair consumed him, a dark and suffocating force that left him gasping for air. He tried to rise from the bed, desperate to find his son, but his injuries were too severe. Nurses and doctors rushed to his side, their voices soothing, but their words were meaningless. All that mattered was that his son had been taken from him. The days that followed were a blur of agony and desperation. Despite his weakened state, Roberto threw himself into the search for Daniel with a relentless fervor. He contacted the police, hired private detectives, and spread the news of his son's abduction across every possible media outlet. His wife, Gina, was inconsolable, her fragile health deteriorating rapidly under the weight of their shared grief. Roberto watched helplessly as she withered before his eyes, the stress and sorrow consuming her like a disease. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of torment, the police uncovered a lead. The thieves had abandoned Daniel in a park, leaving him with nothing but the moon-shaped pendant that had once symbolized Roberto's promise to always protect him. Local authorities had found the boy alone, scared, and without any identifying documents. He had been taken to an orphanage, where he was registered simply as Daniel. Roberto and Gina scoured every orphanage in the city, their hope dwindling with each fruitless visit. Despite their efforts, they never found their son, and the pain of that loss haunted Roberto every day. He buried himself in work, using it as a shield against the relentless ache in his heart. But he never gave up hope that one day, he might find Daniel again. Now, years later, As Roberto stared at the moon-shaped pendant around the young gardener's neck, the memories came rushing back with a force that left him reeling. The same pendant, the same symbol of a love that had been ripped away from him. How could this be? The realization that there was an undeniable connection between Daniel and his long-lost son gripped him with a fierce determination. He knew he had to uncover the truth, no matter what it took. With tears brimming in his eyes, Roberto made a solemn vow to himself. "I will find the truth, Daniel. I will discover what happened to you, and I will bring you back home." Driven by this newfound resolve, Roberto decided to launch a thorough investigation into Daniel's past. He began by poring over old records, searching for any clue that might connect Daniel to his missing son. Every document, every piece of information was examined with meticulous care, each new lead filling him with a fragile hope. But Roberto knew he couldn't do this alone. He reached out to a private detective, a man he had trusted with sensitive matters in the past. Together, they reopened the old case files, dissecting every detail of the kidnapping that had haunted Roberto for so long. They scrutinized every angle, determined to uncover anything that might have been overlooked. Meanwhile, life at the mansion continued as usual. Daniel worked tirelessly in the gardens, unaware of the storm brewing behind the scenes. He remained dedicated to his tasks, driven by a renewed sense of purpose after Roberto's supportive words. The garden became his refuge, a place where he could lose himself in the rhythm of the work, his mind at peace as he nurtured the plants that thrived under his care. Little did he know that the man he admired so much was delving into the deepest secrets of his past. Roberto's investigation began with a visit to the orphanage where Daniel had been raised. He spoke with former caretakers, hoping to find someone who remembered the boy found in the park so many years ago. One woman, Dona Marta, an elderly caregiver with a kind heart and a sharp memory, recalled the day Daniel was brought to the orphanage as if it had happened yesterday. "I remember it well," Dona Marta said, her voice tinged with the sadness of the memory. She poured tea for Roberto as they sat in her modest home. He was such a small, frightened child, found alone in that park with nothing but that pendant. It broke my heart to see him so lost and without anyone to claim him. Roberto felt a lump in his throat as he listened, the ache in his chest almost unbearable. "Dona Marta, was there any record of him? Anything that might have indicated where he came from or who his parents were?" he asked, his voice barely steady. Dona Marta shook her head sadly, her eyes filled with the same sorrow that Roberto felt. "No, there was nothing. He had no documents, no name, nothing that could tell us who he was. We took him in, gave him the name Daniel, and did our best to care for him, but his past remained a mystery. No one ever came looking for him." Despite the initial disappointment, Roberto refused to give up. With the detective by his side, he began to comb through records of disappearances from that time, searching for any link between his son's kidnapping and Daniel's appearance in the park. They followed every lead, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. Days turned into weeks as they painstakingly sifted through the evidence, their frustration growing with each dead end. But Roberto's determination never wavered. He had waited too long and endured too much heartache to give up now. The investigation led them down many paths, some promising, others filled with disappointment. Yet, with each setback, Roberto only grew more resolved. He knew that somewhere, buried beneath the layers of time and neglect, lay the truth he so desperately sought. The truth that would reunite him with his son and finally bring peace to his shattered heart. The road ahead was long and fraught with challenges, but Roberto was prepared to face them all. He had made a promise to himself and to the son he had lost, and nothing would stop him from keeping it. As days passed at the mansion, Daniel began to sense that something was different. Roberto, though still kind and supportive, seemed more preoccupied and distant, his thoughts often wandering elsewhere. The older man would occasionally fall into deep silences, his brow furrowed as if wrestling with something profound. Daniel, ever respectful, chose not to pry into his employer's matters, instead focusing on his duties in the garden. Yet, he couldn't shake the feeling that a storm was brewing beneath the surface. One day, amidst the methodical sorting of old records, the detective unearthed a document that sent a jolt through Roberto's entire being. It was an old police report, yellowed with age, detailing the discovery of an abandoned car near the very park where Daniel had been found as a child. The report mentioned that the car had been registered in Roberto Gonzalez's name and that there were clear signs of a violent struggle at the scene. Roberto's heart raced as he read the report, his hands trembling. "This is my car," he whispered to himself, his voice thick with emotion. "This is proof we were so close. Daniel must be my son." A wave of hope surged within him, accompanied by the gnawing anxiety of what such a revelation might bring. Determined to confirm his suspicions once and for all, Roberto decided that a DNA test was the only way to obtain undeniable proof. The thought of approaching Daniel with such a sensitive matter filled him with both hope and trepidation. He knew that he needed to tread carefully. The last thing he wanted was to frighten or alienate the young man who had unknowingly become so important to him. Roberto resolved to proceed with caution, quietly laying the groundwork for what could be the most significant discovery of his life. As the investigation deepened, Roberto began to see Daniel through a new lens. Every movement, every subtle expression seemed to echo the memories of his lost son. The way Daniel's brow would furrow in concentration, the shy smile that would light up his face when he felt proud of his work. It was as if Roberto was glimpsing pieces of his past in the young gardener. Despite the overwhelming emotion, Roberto knew he needed to wait for the results of the DNA test before he could reveal his suspicions to Daniel. He was both anxious and fearful of what the results might show, knowing that the truth had the power to reshape their lives forever. But regardless of the outcome, Roberto was determined to face it head-on, with his heart full of hope. In the meantime, Roberto found himself drawn more and more to the garden. He would find excuses to leave his office and wander outside, where he could observe Daniel at work. Their interactions, once limited to polite exchanges, began to grow into something more meaningful. Roberto started joining Daniel in the garden, initially under the pretense of helping with tasks, but gradually these moments became a cherished part of his day. The garden, once just a place of beauty, became a sanctuary where he could connect with the young man he hoped was his son. "You have a real gift for this, Daniel," Roberto remarked one afternoon, as they both stood admiring a vibrant bed of newly planted flowers. The air was rich with the scent of fresh earth and blooming petals, a serene contrast to the storm that raged within Roberto's heart. "Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez," Daniel replied, his voice soft with modesty. "Gardening has always brought me a sense of peace. It's something I've loved since I was a child." A shy smile tugged at the corners of his mouth, and Roberto couldn't help but feel a deep sense of affection for the young man. As days turned into weeks, the bond between them grew stronger. Their conversations, once centered around the garden, began to touch on more personal topics. They spoke about life, their dreams, and even their hopes for the future. Daniel found himself opening up to Roberto, who he now saw not just as an employer, but as a mentor and a friend. Roberto, for his part, felt a paternal affection blossoming within him, his desire to protect and care for Daniel intensifying with each passing day. Inside the mansion, Gina, Roberto's wife, could not help but notice the changes in her husband. He was more present, more involved in the daily routine of the household, and particularly interested in the garden. His frequent visits to the garden and the time he spent with Daniel had not gone unnoticed. Gina's concern grew, and one evening, as they sat together over dinner, she decided to confront him. "Roberto," she began, her voice gentle yet probing, "I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time with Daniel in the garden. What's going on? Is something troubling you?" Roberto knew that he could no longer keep his suspicions hidden from Gina. The weight of the secret had grown too heavy to bear alone. He met her gaze, seeing the concern in her eyes, and felt a deep need to share everything that had been consuming him. "Gina, we need to talk," he said softly, taking her hand in his. "There's something very important I need to tell you." The seriousness in his tone made Gina's heart skip a beat. She followed him to his office, where Roberto closed the door behind them, signaling that this conversation was not to be overheard. In the quiet sanctuary of his office, Surrounded by the relics of their life together, Roberto began to speak. He recounted everything: the pendant, the discoveries, and the feelings that had plagued him since the moment he saw the familiar symbol hanging around Daniel's neck. "Ever since I saw that pendant, I haven't been able to shake the feeling that Daniel might be our son," Roberto confessed, his voice thick with emotion. "I've been investigating, and there are so many coincidences, so many details that I just can't ignore." Gina listened in silence, her eyes widening with every word. The memories of their lost son, the agony of those years of searching, flooded back with a force that nearly overwhelmed her. Tears welled up in her eyes, spilling over as she realized what Roberto was suggesting. "Roberto," she whispered, her voice trembling, "do you think he could be our Daniel?" "I believe he is," Roberto replied, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside him. "But we need to be sure. I'm planning to have a DNA test done. Only then can we know for certain." He held Gina's hands tightly, offering her the strength he knew she needed. Gina nodded, the mix of hope and fear almost too much to bear. "Then let's do it," she agreed, her voice resolute. "We need to know the truth. We've waited too long to let this chance slip away." With their resolve steeled, Roberto and Gina prepared for what could be the most life-altering discovery of their lives. The journey that had begun with so much pain and uncertainty was now on the brink of a revelation that could finally bring them peace, or shatter their hearts once more. But they were ready to face whatever came next, united in their determination to uncover the truth and bring their family back together, no matter the cost. From that pivotal moment, Roberto and Gina found themselves drawn even closer together, united by the hope that Daniel might truly be their long-lost son. The possibility brought a renewed sense of purpose and intimacy to their relationship, as they clung to the fragile hope that years of pain and loss could finally give way to healing and reunion. While they anxiously awaited the results of the DNA test, Roberto continued to deepen his bond with Daniel, all the while preparing the young man for a revelation that had the potential to change all their lives forever. Gina, on her part, became increasingly affectionate in her observations of Daniel. Every time she watched him working diligently in the garden, her heart swelled with emotion. She couldn't help but see glimpses of the little boy she had lost so many years ago in his mannerisms and expressions. The way he moved, the way he seemed to find peace among the flowers and plants. Each moment convinced her more that Daniel was indeed her son. But she was careful not to raise his suspicions, instead choosing to silently cherish these moments, holding on to the hope that soon they would have the proof they needed. As days turned into weeks, the tension within the mansion grew palpable. Every passing day seemed to stretch time further, making the wait for the DNA results agonizingly slow. Yet, within this tension, a remarkable transformation was taking place. The relationship between Roberto and Daniel was evolving, blossoming into something far deeper than the typical relationship between an employer and his employee. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a connection that neither could fully explain but both felt intensely. Roberto knew that he had to solve the mystery of Daniel's identity once and for all. The coincidences and clues were too compelling to ignore. With the help of the private detective, Roberto continued to pursue every possible lead. The investigation took him down paths he hadn't expected, and during one of his searches, he came across a retired police officer named Mr. Ramirez. This officer had worked on the case involving the abandoned child found in the park years ago. Roberto arranged to meet Mr. Ramirez at a small, local cafe, feeling a mix of anxiety and hope as he approached the meeting. This conversation could be the key to unlocking the truth he so desperately sought. When Mr. Ramirez arrived, he was an elderly man with a sharp mind, his eyes still bright with the memory of a career spent solving mysteries. Roberto wasted no time, his need for answers overpowering any sense of decorum. "Mr. Ramirez, thank you for meeting with me," Roberto began, his voice betraying his urgency. "I need to know more about the child who was found in the park years ago. I believe he might be my son." The retired officer regarded Roberto with a mixture of curiosity and sympathy. "I remember that case well," he said, his voice tinged with the weight of past tragedies. It was one of the saddest cases I ever worked on. The child was found alone, scared, with no identification except for a moon-shaped pendant. Roberto felt a shiver run down his spine at the mention of the pendant. It was the same pendant that now hung around Daniel's neck. "That pendant," Roberto said, his voice tight with emotion. "The young man who works for me, he still has it. I need to know if he could be my son." Mr. Ramirez nodded thoughtfully, understanding the gravity of Roberto's words. "I remember we tried everything we could to find the child's parents, but we had no luck. The case went cold, and the boy was eventually placed in an orphanage. But now that you mention it, I do recall your name appearing in the records as the owner of the abandoned car found near the park. At the time, I suspected there was a connection, but we could never prove it." As the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place, Roberto felt a renewed sense of hope, though it was tempered by the need for concrete evidence. "Mr. Ramirez," he said earnestly, "this is vital for me and my wife. We need to know for sure. I'm planning to have a DNA test done. Do you think that could finally give us the answers we need?" The retired officer nodded. "A DNA test would provide irrefutable proof. If you need any more information, I'm here to help in any way I can." Grateful beyond words, Roberto thanked Mr. Ramirez and left the cafe with a sense of urgency. The evidence was mounting, but it would take the DNA test to confirm what his heart was already beginning to accept as truth. When Roberto returned to the mansion, he found Gina waiting anxiously for him, her eyes searching his face for any sign of news. "Roberto, what did you find out?" she asked, her voice filled with both hope and fear. Roberto took her hands, his touch gentle but firm. "Gina," he began, recounting the details of his meeting with Mr. Ramirez. "Everything points to the fact that Daniel really could be our son. But we need definitive proof. The DNA test will confirm it one way or the other." Gina's eyes filled with tears, her emotions a turbulent mix of excitement and anxiety. "Then let's do it, Roberto," she agreed, her voice trembling with the weight of the moment. "We need to know the truth, no matter what it is." With that decision made, Roberto knew it was time to approach Daniel. He found the young man in the garden, as usual, tending to the flowers with the same quiet dedication that had earned him Roberto's admiration. As Roberto walked towards him, he felt a surge of emotion, knowing that the conversation they were about to have could change everything. "Daniel," Roberto called out gently, trying to keep the emotion from his voice. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" Daniel looked up from his work, surprised by the serious tone in Roberto's voice. "Of course, Mr. Gonzalez. What's on your mind?" Roberto took a deep breath, steadying himself for what he was about to say. "Daniel, there's something very important I need to share with you," he began, his eyes searching Daniel's for any sign of distress. "Ever since I saw your pendant, I felt that there might be a connection between us, something more than just the bond we've developed over time. I've done some investigating, spoken to people who were involved in a case years ago, and all the signs point to the possibility that you might be my missing son." Daniel stared at Roberto, his eyes wide with shock, struggling to process the words he had just heard. "Mr. Gonzalez, it's overwhelming. I've always wondered about my past, where I came from, but I never imagined something like this." Roberto stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "I know this is a lot to take in, and I don't want to push you, but I believe that the only way we can be sure is to do a DNA test. It's the only way to confirm if what I'm feeling is true. I'm asking you to consider it, not just for my sake, but for yours as well. We both deserve to know the truth." Daniel nodded slowly, still processing the enormity of what was being proposed. "If there's a chance that you're right," he said, his voice steadying, "then I want to know the truth too. Let's do the test." Relief washed over Roberto as he smiled warmly at Daniel. "Thank you, Daniel. Whatever happens, I want you to know that I care about you deeply. We'll face whatever comes together." As the two men stood in the garden, surrounded by the beauty that Daniel had carefully cultivated, the weight of the impending test hung in the air. Both Roberto and Daniel knew that the results could bring either unimaginable joy or profound heartbreak. But for now, they were united in their determination to uncover the truth, no matter where it might lead. In the days following the DNA test, the atmosphere in the Gonzalez household was thick with anticipation and tension. Every moment seemed to stretch endlessly as Roberto, Gina, and Daniel navigated the emotional turbulence of their situation. They each grappled with their mix of hope, fear, and uncertainty, all while trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy in their daily lives. Finally, the day arrived. Roberto held the envelope containing the test results, feeling the weight of the truth that would soon be revealed. He looked at Gina, who was sitting beside him, her hands clasped tightly together, and then at Daniel, who stood across from them, his expression a mixture of hope and anxiety. Taking a deep breath, Roberto opened the envelope and began to read the results. The room was silent. The only sound was the rustling of the paper as Roberto's hands trembled slightly. As his eyes scanned the words, a wave of emotion overcame him. The truth was now undeniable. Daniel was indeed the son that he and Gina had lost so many years ago. Gina let out a sob of relief and joy, tears streaming down her face as she rushed to embrace Daniel. "My son, my sweet boy," she whispered through her tears, holding him tightly as if she would never let him go again. Daniel, overwhelmed by the intensity of the moment, wrapped his arms around her, feeling the warmth and love he had longed for all his life. Roberto joined the embrace, his heart swelling with a mixture of joy, relief, and gratitude. The years of pain, loss, and uncertainty melted away in that moment, replaced by the overwhelming joy of their family being whole once more. The next morning, Daniel awoke with a new sense of identity and purpose. The revelation of his true parentage had been life-altering, and while the emotions were still raw, he was determined to embrace his new life as Roberto and Gina's son. He knew the transition would be challenging, but he was also excited by the possibilities that lay ahead. He was ready to face whatever came next with the support of the family he had finally found. Roberto and Gina, eager to make up for lost time, offered Daniel all the support and guidance he needed. They decided it was time for him to join the family business, not just as an employee, but in a role of significant responsibility and trust. Roberto saw the potential in Daniel and was eager to mentor him, guiding him through the intricacies of the business world. One morning, over breakfast, Roberto broached the subject. "Daniel," he began, "your mother and I have been discussing your future. We believe you have the talent and intelligence to be a key part of our company. There's a lot to learn, but I'm confident you'll excel." Daniel, touched by their faith in him, nodded. "Thank you, Dad. I'm honored by your trust, and I'll do everything I can to live up to your expectations. I'm eager to learn and contribute to the family business." In the weeks that followed, Daniel was introduced to various facets of the company. He spent time in different departments, gaining a comprehensive understanding of how the business operated. Whether it was finance, operations, or marketing, Daniel threw himself into each task with enthusiasm and a desire to learn. Roberto was by his side every step of the way, offering advice, sharing his expertise, and watching with pride as Daniel began to find his footing. The company's employees, though initially surprised by Daniel's sudden rise, quickly recognized his dedication and willingness to work hard. His sincerity and commitment won many of them over. However, not everyone was pleased with Daniel's newfound position. Manuel Lopez, the mansion's longtime butler, watched with growing resentment as Daniel was welcomed into both the family and the business. Manuel had never forgiven Daniel for the incident in the garden, where Roberto had publicly defended him. Now, seeing Daniel elevated to a prestigious role within the company only fueled Manuel's envy and anger. He began to harbor a deep-seated grudge, one that festered as he watched Daniel's star rise. Determined to undermine Daniel's success, Manuel began to plot against him. He took advantage of his long-standing position in the household and the company, subtly inserting himself into situations where he could cause trouble for Daniel. One day, as Daniel was reviewing important financial documents in his office, Manuel appeared at the door, his expression one of false friendliness. "Daniel, you look quite busy," Manuel remarked, a smile playing on his lips that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Do you need any help?" I've been around this business for years, and I might be able to guide you through some of the more challenging aspects. Unaware of Manuel's ulterior motives, Daniel appreciated the offer. Thanks, Manuel. I could use some help. These financial reports are a bit complicated, and I'm still getting the hang of it. Manuel seized the opportunity, offering misleading advice and pointing out errors that weren't there, hoping to set Daniel up for failure. He played the role of the helpful advisor, all the while hoping that his machinations would cause Daniel to make mistakes that could tarnish his reputation. However, Daniel's sharp mind and natural aptitude for learning helped him catch the inconsistencies in Manuel's guidance. He double-checked the information and managed to correct the errors before they could cause any real damage. Roberto, who had been keeping a close eye on his son's progress, began to notice the growing tension between Daniel and Manuel. Concerned, he called Daniel into his office for a private conversation. "Daniel," Roberto began, his tone serious, "I've noticed that Manuel has been inserting himself into your work. I want you to know that I trust you completely. Don't let him get in your way or discourage you." Daniel appreciated his father's support and decided it was time to confront the issue head-on. He sought out Manuel later that day, determined to address the situation directly. "Manuel," Daniel began, his voice calm but firm, "I know what you've been trying to do. I'm here to work hard and learn, not to cause problems. I hope we can find a way to work together, but I won't tolerate any more attempts to sabotage me." Manuel, caught off guard by Daniel's directness, hesitated before responding. He hadn't expected Daniel to confront him so boldly. For a moment, he considered his options. Realizing that any further attempts to undermine Daniel could backfire, Manuel forced a smile and replied, "I don't know what you're talking about, but if that's how you feel, I'll stay out of your way." Despite his outward concession, Manuel's resentment only deepened. While he backed off for the time being, he continued to nurse his anger, quietly looking for another opportunity to bring Daniel down. For now, though, Daniel had won this battle, securing his place in both the family and the business. As he walked away from the encounter with Manuel, Daniel felt a renewed sense of determination. He knew that the road ahead would be filled with challenges, but with his family's support and growing confidence, he was ready to face whatever came next. As Daniel continued to distinguish himself within the company, his confidence and capabilities grew with each passing day. He attended critical meetings, presented innovative ideas that garnered the admiration of his colleagues, and steadily gained the trust and respect of everyone around him. Roberto and Gina observed his progress with immense pride, seeing in Daniel the embodiment of the values they had always cherished. They could see the qualities of leadership, integrity, and creativity shining through in their son, qualities they had always hoped to pass down. Months went by, and despite the obstacles Manuel Lopez attempted to place in his path, Daniel solidified his position as a capable and respected leader within the company. He learned to navigate the complex corporate landscape with increasing skill, mastering the intricacies of business while continuing to receive unwavering support from his parents. With each challenge he overcame, Daniel grew more confident in his role and more certain of his place in the Gonzalez family. At the end of each day, Daniel would take a moment to reflect on his journey, how far he had come since discovering his true identity, the growth he had experienced, and the challenges that lay ahead. Though he knew there was still much to learn and many hurdles to clear, he felt ready to face them all. He had found not only his family but also a sense of purpose that had given him a new direction in life. Meanwhile, Roberto and Gina found themselves continually celebrating Daniel's presence in their lives. Their long-lost son had returned to them, and with him, the hope for a bright future for the entire family. They looked forward to the days ahead with a renewed sense of optimism, confident that together they could overcome anything. However, while the Gonzalez family was reveling in their newfound unity, Manuel Lopez's resentment festered. As the butler of the mansion, Manuel had watched from the sidelines as Daniel ascended within the family business. His envy and bitterness only deepened with each of Daniel's successes. Manuel felt overshadowed, his years of service and loyalty seemingly disregarded in favor of the young upstart who had suddenly claimed a prominent place in the Gonzalez family. Manuel's resentment drove him to hatch a plan of sabotage against Daniel. Though his primary duties lay within the mansion, not the company, Manuel began using his influence among the mansion staff to create disruptions that would indirectly affect Daniel's performance at work. He hoped to cast doubt on Daniel's competence and to undermine the trust Roberto and Gina had placed in their son. One morning, Manuel gathered several of the mansion's employees in the kitchen under the guise of a routine meeting. Once they were out of earshot of the main house, Manuel's tone turned conspiratorial. "We need to do something about Daniel," he said, his voice low and insidious. "He doesn't deserve the position he's been given. We need to show Mr. Gonzalez that Daniel isn't as capable as he thinks." The employees, who respected Manuel's authority and were wary of crossing him, hesitated but eventually agreed to go along with his scheme. They began to create small, seemingly insignificant problems around the mansion, intentional maintenance oversights, misplaced documents, and other minor issues that, while trivial on their own, added up to a considerable distraction for Daniel. In addition to these disruptions, Manuel took his sabotage a step further by manipulating Daniel's documents and records. He hoped that by causing small but persistent distractions, he could wear Daniel down and force him to make mistakes that would reflect poorly on him in the company. Despite these underhanded tactics, Daniel continued to approach his new role with determination and diligence. He threw himself into learning every aspect of the family business, from the complexities of finance to the nuances of marketing and operations. He was eager to prove himself worthy of the trust Roberto and Gina had placed in him and was determined not to let them down. However, it wasn't long before Daniel began to notice that something was amiss. Small but strange occurrences started to happen with increasing frequency, both in the mansion and in the company. Light bulbs that had just been replaced would burn out within days. Important documents would go missing only to turn up in the wrong places. And financial records he was certain he had double-checked would suddenly contain errors. One afternoon, while reviewing an important financial report, Daniel noticed that some of the data didn't match the figures he had originally entered. He was sure he had checked the information multiple times, so the discrepancies puzzled him. Determined to get to the bottom of it, Daniel began investigating the source of the errors. After a careful review, he discovered that the original documents had been altered after he had finished with them. This discovery put Daniel on high alert. He realized that the problems he had been experiencing were not mere coincidences but deliberate attempts to sabotage his work. He knew he had to be vigilant and take steps to protect himself from further interference. Daniel decided to implement stricter controls over his work and began quietly documenting every unusual occurrence. He was determined to identify the source of the sabotage and put an end to it before it could do any real damage. Daniel also resolved to confide in Roberto about what he had discovered. He knew that his father would support him and help him address the issue. But first, Daniel wanted to gather as much evidence as possible to ensure that whoever was behind the sabotage could not easily deny their actions. Manuel, unaware that Daniel was onto him, continued his scheming with the same determination that had driven him from the beginning. He believed that his plans were working and that it was only a matter of time before Daniel made a mistake that would lead to his downfall. But what Manuel didn't realize was that Daniel was stronger and more resilient than he had anticipated. The challenges Daniel had faced throughout his life had prepared him for this moment, and he was not about to let anyone take away the family and future he had fought so hard to find. As the tension continued to build, Daniel knew that a confrontation with Manuel was inevitable. But he was ready. With his newfound confidence and the support of his parents, Daniel was prepared to face whatever came next. He was determined not only to protect his place in the Gonzalez family but to prove, once and for all, that he belonged there. Roberto, always in tune with his son's well-being, had noticed the tension building in Daniel over the past few weeks. One evening, as they sat together in the study, Roberto finally voiced his concerns. "Daniel, I've noticed that you've been worried lately. What's on your mind?" Daniel hesitated for a moment, then decided to confide in his father. He explained the strange inconsistencies he'd been encountering in the documents, as well as the minor but persistent issues that had been cropping up around the mansion. Roberto listened intently, and as Daniel spoke, His suspicions about Manuel began to solidify. Roberto knew the butler's character well, and it was becoming clear that Manuel might be behind the disruptions. "I'll keep an eye on this, Daniel," Roberto assured him, his voice steady with resolve. "Trust me, we'll get to the bottom of it. You focus on your work and leave the rest to me." Meanwhile, Manuel, sensing that his previous attempts at sabotage had not yet achieved the desired results, decided to intensify his efforts. He began to manipulate the schedules of the mansion's employees, causing confusion and delays that directly impacted Daniel's routine. He also took things further by sending false information about Daniel to key employees in the company, hoping to plant seeds of doubt about Daniel's competence and leadership. Roberto, now more vigilant than ever, began to notice a troubling pattern. The problems seemed to arise whenever Manuel was involved. Determined to protect his son and the company, Roberto decided to take matters into his own hands. He conducted a surprise inspection of Manuel's quarters, carefully sifting through the butler's personal belongings. What he found confirmed his worst fears: evidence of deliberate manipulations, falsified documents, and detailed notes tracking Daniel's movements and activities. With this irrefutable evidence in hand, Roberto knew it was time to confront Manuel. The following morning, he called Manuel into his office. "Manuel, we need to talk," Roberto began, his tone calm but authoritative. "I found evidence that you've been sabotaging Daniel and causing problems both here at the mansion and in the company. This behavior is unacceptable." Manuel, caught off guard, tried to defend himself. "Mr. Gonzalez, I was only trying to protect the company. I don't think Daniel is ready for the responsibilities he's been given." Roberto's gaze hardened, his voice firm as he responded. "It is not your place to judge Daniel's readiness or capabilities. Your actions have shown that you do not have the best interests of our family or our company at heart. I cannot allow someone who behaves like this to remain in our home or our business. You're fired, effective immediately." The decision was final, and Manuel had no choice but to accept it. As he packed his belongings and left the mansion for the last time, a sense of relief washed over the household. The tension that had been hanging in the air began to dissipate, replaced by a renewed sense of harmony and focus. The employees who had been swayed by Manuel's influence quickly fell back in line, and the atmosphere both in the mansion and at the company improved significantly. Freed from the shadow of Manuel's sabotage, Daniel flourished. He became even more confident and determined, now fully aware of the challenges that could arise from within. With the continued support of Roberto and Gina, he strengthened his position in the company, earning the respect and admiration of his colleagues and proving that he was more than capable of handling the responsibilities that came with his role. As the months passed, Daniel solidified his place within the company. He faced challenges head-on, demonstrating not only his talent but also the integrity and strength of character that Roberto and Gina had always valued. The company began to thrive under his leadership, and it was clear to everyone that Daniel was destined to take the family business to new heights. Manuel's plot had failed, and Daniel emerged stronger, more confident, and fully prepared for the bright future that lay ahead alongside his family. One morning, as the sun bathed the Gonzalez mansion in golden light, Daniel walked through the company's halls with a firm and determined posture. He had overcome numerous challenges and was now ready to fully embrace his responsibilities, both to his family and to the business. Roberto and Gina watched with pride as their son continued to grow and succeed. Roberto, in particular, felt a deep sense of satisfaction seeing the qualities he valued most: integrity, determination, and leadership reflected in Daniel. He knew that the company was in good hands and that the future was bright. That afternoon, an important meeting was scheduled to discuss the company's next strategic steps. Daniel, having meticulously prepared, was ready. He reviewed the reports and strategic plans once more, ensuring he was thoroughly familiar with every detail. As he entered the meeting room, he greeted the executives and employees with a confident smile, his presence commanding attention. "Good morning, everyone," Daniel began, his voice calm but authoritative. "Today, we'll be discussing our growth strategies for the next quarter. I've developed some ideas that I believe can help us reach new levels of success. He distributed the documents to each team member and then began his presentation. As Daniel outlined his vision, it became clear that he had a deep understanding of the market and a clear plan for the company's future. His ideas were innovative yet grounded in solid research and analysis. The employees, some of whom had initially doubted his abilities, now looked at him with newfound respect and admiration. Roberto, sitting next to Daniel, observed his son with a heart full of pride. He couldn't stop smiling as he watched Daniel lead the meeting with natural confidence and poise. When the meeting concluded, the applause was unanimous. Daniel had proven to everyone in the room, and to himself, that he was more than capable of leading the company. As the applause died down, Roberto stood up and placed a hand on Daniel's shoulder. "You did an excellent job, Daniel," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You've shown everyone here today that you're not only ready to lead, but that you're the right person to take this company into the future." Daniel smiled, deeply moved by his father's words. "Thank you, Dad. I couldn't have done it without your support and guidance." The meeting marked a new chapter for the Gonzalez family and their business. With Manuel's toxic influence removed and Daniel firmly established as a leader, the company was poised for a period of growth and success unlike any they had seen before. Daniel's journey, from discovering his true identity to proving himself as a capable and respected leader, had come full circle. He was now ready to face whatever the future held, confident in his abilities, and supported by the love and trust of his family. Later that evening, Roberto and Gina decided to commemorate Daniel's success with an intimate celebration at the mansion. The main hall, adorned with elegant decorations and a lavishly set table, was filled with the warm presence of family and close friends. The atmosphere buzzed with joy and relief, a collective acknowledgement that the difficult times were finally behind them. As the evening progressed, Gina, her eyes glistening with emotion, raised a glass of champagne. With a smile that reflected her pride and deep affection, she began, "Today, we celebrate not only Daniel's success in the company but also the reunion of our family. Daniel, my son, we are so incredibly proud of you. You've come so far, and tonight is a testament to your strength and determination." Daniel, visibly moved by his mother's heartfelt words, stood up to address the room. His voice, steady yet filled with emotion, carried the gratitude he felt. "Thank you, Mom, and thank you, Dad. None of this would have been possible without your unwavering support and trust. I know I still have much to learn, but with both of you by my side, I am confident that we can achieve great things together." Roberto, brimming with pride, placed a reassuring hand on Daniel's shoulder. "We're in this together, son," he said, his voice rich with the bond that had grown between them. "You've proven that you're a true leader, and I know that with you at the helm, our company and our family are in the best hands." The celebration continued with laughter, animated conversations, and moments of quiet reflection on the journey they had all undertaken. Daniel felt a profound sense of gratitude, not only for finding his family but also for being embraced so fully into their lives. The connection he had longed for was now a reality, and he reveled in the joy of being part of something so special and meaningful. As the night drew on, Daniel, Roberto, and Gina quietly slipped away from the lively gathering and made their way to the garden, where the night sky was a canvas of shimmering stars. The cool air was refreshing, and the serenity of the garden provided a perfect backdrop for this intimate family moment. They found a bench nestled among the flowers and sat down, gazing up at the stars that seemed to shine even brighter that night. Gina, her voice soft and contemplative, pointed toward the sky. "Look at those stars," she said, her eyes reflecting the starlight. "They've always been there, even when we couldn't see them, just like our love and our hope that one day we would be together again." Roberto smiled warmly, taking both Gina's and Daniel's hands in his own. "Life has brought us back together," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "And now, as we look toward the future, I know that together we're stronger than ever. We can face any challenge that comes our way." Daniel nodded, feeling a profound peace settle over him. The weight of his journey, the struggles and uncertainties, seemed to lift in that moment. "Yes, Dad," he agreed, his voice resolute. We're together, and we're ready for whatever comes next. In that quiet garden, under the watchful gaze of the stars, the Gonzalez family made a silent pact to cherish the love they had found, to face the future with courage, and to build a life filled with hope and joy. The mansion, once a place marked by loss and sadness, had been transformed. It now stood as a symbol of their resilience and the love that had brought them back together. The end of one journey had seamlessly transitioned into the beginning of another. Daniel, Roberto, and Gina, finally at peace, were ready to embrace the future, fortified by the unbreakable bond of a truly reunited family. Together, they looked forward to building a legacy that would honor the past, celebrate the present, and inspire the future, guided always by the love and strength that had brought them back together. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey of love, resilience, and family. As we've seen, no matter the challenges or obstacles, the strength of a united family can overcome anything. Now, we'd love to hear from you. What have you learned from this story? What is one lesson or insight that you'll take with you and apply in your own life? Please share your thoughts and reflections in the comments below. We'd love to read them. If you enjoyed this video, please leave your comment below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiring stories and content. Your support means the world to us, and we look forward to having you with us on this journey.